In August 1945, after years of top-secret development, the United States detonated atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, killing more than 120,000 people and injuring countless more. These attacks marked the first two uses of atomic weapons in warfare, and in the decades following the attacks, people from across the globe have gone to great lengths to ensure they would never be used again. Governments signed treaties, and citizens produced books, songs, and even an extremely overrated Christopher Nolan movie to urge our leaders to leave these weapons in their stockpiles. But what if I told you atomic weapons were used for a third time in warfare less than 20 years after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? This is the true story of the time France nuked Algeria. In 1830, after centuries of conflict with Barbary pirates based out of Algeria and following trade and debt disputes between its administrators, France invaded Algiers. Over the next 70-plus years, France expanded its control over Algeria, designating the territory as an official French department in 1848. Algeria wasn't just a colony. It was now considered an integral part of France proper. Think of what Alaska is to the US, or whatever this part of Russia is, not technically connected to the larger territory, but considered integral all the same. Algeria was critically important to France at this time. Beyond helping France access the rest of its colonial territories in Africa, Algeria granted France more influence in the Mediterranean, additional income and resources to fuel its government and armies, and among other things, was the home of more than 1.5 million French and European settlers. Resentment between Algerians and their French rulers had been present since the inception of French Algeria. After World War II ended, France reversed its centuries-old policy and granted citizenship and voting rights to all Algerians in 1947. Algerian nationalism had spread and boiled over in 1954 when the National Algerian Front attacked French military and civilian targets and released a declaration for Algerian independence. This conflict became known as the Algerian War, and France was not willing to easily give up its territory, with its prime minister declaring in the National Assembly, "One does not compromise when it comes to defending the internal peace of the nation, the unity and integrity of the Republic. The Algerian departments are part of the French Republic. They have been French for a long time, and they are irrevocably French. Between them and metropolitan France, there could be no conceivable secession. Pierre Mendès France." Wait, the French Prime Minister's last name was literally France? That's badass. Unfortunately for France, enforcing their claims to Algeria proved more difficult to implement than they initially anticipated. By 1956, the French had sent more than 400,000 troops to restore order in Algeria, but instability in the French government back in Paris was threatening their ability to continue the fight. In 1958, the Fourth French Republic collapsed as a result of a military coup, and Charles de Gaulle was reinstated as president. With his country's national prestige damaged, de Gaulle was committed to bringing an end to the war while restoring France's pride. The French government had been secretly developing their own nuclear weapons program for years. As the country began rebuilding after World War II, nuclear energy became a fixture, and the plutonium byproduct from these plants was utilized towards its nuclear weapons program. The 1956 Suez Canal crisis strengthened the French's commitment towards building nuclear weapons. Not only was Egypt supporting the rebels in Algeria, but their closure of the canal was threatening France's access to critical oil supplies in its colonial empire. When the United States refused to assist France in this conflict, it was decided nuclear weapons were their only way to restore their status on the global stage. The French's commitment to building nuclear weapons was reaffirmed with the return of de Gaulle to power in 1958, and by 1960, they were ready to conduct their first test. After considering numerous French territories to conduct this inaugural test, including the islands of Reunion, New Caledonia, Clipperton, and French Polynesia, they ultimately decided on the Sahara Desert in Algeria, partly because of its closer proximity to mainland France. On February 13, 1960, with hostilities between French and Algerian forces still raging, the French tested their first nuclear weapon, dubbed Jerboy Blue, French for blue rodent. The test yielded 70 kilotons, more than 4.5 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The news was widely condemned by African nations, and while many in France welcomed the news of the successful test and return of French prestige, it did little to affect the trajectory of the war. Independence referendums were held in France and Algeria in 1961, with nearly 70% voting in favor of Algerian independence. The French ultimately tested 4 atmospheric and 2 underground explosions in Algeria between 1960 and July 5, 1962, when Algeria was granted independence. Part of the peace treaty signed between the two countries allowed France to continue its nuclear tests in Algeria until 1966, and more than 16 tests were conducted after Algeria's independence before the French moved their tests to its specific territories. Today, the areas in the desert where the French conducted their tests remain closed to the public, and the effects of these tests remain visible to this day. But unlike Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where more than 120,000 people were killed, These nuclear explosions, detonated in a country at war, remain one of the least talked about nuclear incidents because of the lack of immediate civilian deaths. But make no mistake, nuclear weapons have been used in war more than we care to realize, and the effects of their testing are still being felt today. Hopefully the 1960s are the last time we have to see them used in warfare.